Hello everyone. So today we'll be talking about physical development in middle adulthood. Middle adulthood is characterized as the age period which is starting from 40 years and goes on till 60 years. So this chapter, tackles both physical development and cognitive development, but in this video we'll only be talking about physical development, and then we'll talk about cognitive development in another video. Now, what you see is that as people hit, the 40-year mark, you begin to notice a lot of different changes in their physical abilities, in let's say their body shape, in their weight, in all of their different senses, right? The first sense that we talk about today is vision, and this condition which starts happening by middle age, in which adults who are part of this, who basically fall within this age range, begin to experience steady declines in their ability to see. This is basically termed as presbyopia, right? Which literally means old eyes, right? And one of the influences on this steady decline in the ability to see and discern is brought about because the elasticity of the lens has been affected. So here you see a structure of an eye, right? And what you can see here is that this is the lens, right? And basically what the lens does is that in order for the image to fall on the retina, which is right here, right, the lens either flattens itself out, right, or it sort of thickens itself. With age, however, what you see is that there's loss of elasticity of the lens, and therefore that's one of the factors that goes into the phenomena of presbyopia, right? So that's one thing. Then another thing that you see is that here on the retina you have these receptor cells, right, which are called rods and cones. This is not in the diagram here. And basically these are specialized differently. So for example, rods are specialized such that they help us see during the night, and cones are specialized such that they help us see during daylight, for example, right? What you see is that there's a loss in our rods, right, by middle adulthood. And because for cones to work efficiently, you need rods to be there as well. And therefore what you see is that the cones do not work as efficiently as well. Cones are also responsible, so they are responsible for vision during daylight. They're also responsible for color discernment, for example. That's one of their functions, right? For visual acuity, how clear or how sharp your vision is, right? So then all of this is also lost as you age, right? So again, there's to sort of sum it up, you have difficulty reading small print, you can have difficulties seeing generally in dim light because of the loss of rods, and then you can have reduced color discrimination. That is because your cones are not working as efficiently either. And another thing that happens is that you're at increased risk of glaucoma, right? So what exactly is glaucoma? Glaucoma is basically this condition in which pressure builds inside the eye, and because of that increased pressure, a lot of different complications can come about. There can be, if glaucoma is left untreated, there can be a complete loss in vision as well, right? So yeah, so this is basically when we talk about what's happening for vision, right? Now next we come to talking about hearing, right? And again, likewise with vision, what we see in hearing is that hearing is also undergoing this phenomena which we term which is termed presbycusis, right? Which again literally translates into old hearing. Now, what exactly is happening with hearing? So, one of the things that you notice is that men experience this problem a lot more than women do. Now, what could be reasons for that? That men experience declines in hearing, which are more substantial than those for women. One of the reasons for this can be that men usually work in places which are extremely loud, right? Perhaps other factors go into it. So, for example, men, considering the sort of cohort we're talking about, perhaps are also more prone to smoking. They're more prone to cardiovascular diseases as well, which has some sort of link with how well they're able to hear, right? Most loss that occurs in hearing is you can no longer distinguish between high tones, right? So this is something that's happening. You start hearing louder. That's another, factor that goes into it, right? So yes, and hearing aids obviously are helpful at this stage when there are significant losses in your ability to hear, right? Next, we talk about skin, right? One of the things that you see is that more wrinkles start to appear. What could be reasons for this? Right. So one of the reasons that your skin starts to show these declines is that your skin is made up of these three different layers. So you have the epidermis here, which is the outer layer, then you have the dermis, and then you have the hypodermis. And the hypodermis is basically made up of fatty cells, right? And this is what gives your skin its elasticity. But as you age, what you see is that the hypodermis, the fatty deposits that make up the hypodermis, start to decline, and what that results in is a decrease in elasticity of the skin and increased wrinkles, right? And you will see changes such as there's this phenomena called crow's feet. So what happens is that around the eyes, these three lines appear in most adults who are middle-aged, right? Again, those are wrinkles. Then there are wrinkles around the forehead. What you see is that there's sagging around the face, arms and legs, and you also have increased age spots, which happen a lot faster the more exposed you are to sunlight, and they happen a lot faster in women than they do in men, right? Next, we talk about muscle fat makeup. And what we see when we talk about muscle fat makeup is that, individuals who are middle-aged, right, they begin to lose a lot more muscle and put on a lot more fat, right? There are certain gender differences here as well, even though, there's weight gain in both of the groups. But men tend to gain more towards the upper abdomen, right, for men, and the back. And for women, it's usually concentrated more towards the waist and the upper arms. Even though these, declines in muscle volume are very gradual, right, and they can be sort of stopped with exercise, especially with weight training exercises, and obviously with diet as well. Diet is something that you see that even when you're, for example, looking at longevity or how long people live, right? So diet seems to have some correlation with that as well, because what you see is that if you start restricting, and these studies have happened in primates, that if you restrict the number of calories that a particular primate is taking in, what you see is that correlates with how long they live. These studies obviously cannot be replicated experimentally in individuals because of the ethics involved. You cannot, sort of take two groups and have one of them eat a lot more than the other. But one thing that you do see is that, for example, with middle-aged individuals who reside in Japan versus middle-aged adults who reside someplace else, in Japan the calorie intake is lesser amongst these individuals, and what you see is that does have sort of a correlation with how long they live. That obviously can tie up with because one of the things that we see later is how cardiovascular disease or cancer, right, or other diseases are sort of linked to your chances of death during this period. And so that that could tie in with that the sort of calories that you're taking in, the amount of calories that you're taking in, could be putting you at a greater risk for something like cardiovascular disease, which obviously then puts you at greater risk of dying, right? Now what we talk about is fertility, right? So fertility, again, one of the things that you see in middle adulthood is a phenomena which is called the climacteric. So what exactly is this? This is basically, the event. It's not one event. So for example, for women, it takes, a couple of years in which what's happening is that your fertility is gradually declining, right? And so again, what you see is that there are some gender differences here. For women, the climacteric, it basically culminates in what is termed menopause, right? Which is when women cease to have their menstrual cycles and are no longer fertile, can no longer bear children, right? And that obviously comes with, changes in hormones. So for example, you would have a lot less estrogen in your bloodstream. After you have hit menopause, basically estrogen levels start to decline during the climacteric. But after you've hit menopause, they would be significantly lower. In men, what does the climacteric look like? In men, the climacteric looks more like decreased, basically it could look like decreased sexual drive, but then what you're seeing is that there could be lesser semen volume, for example, right? There could be lower semen motility, right? So the speed of the sperm, that could be a factor, right? Mostly, and I'm sure some of you would have come across this, that there's a lot of there are a lot of things attached with the coming on of menopause, right? Like for example, some of that is hot flashes that women experience. All of these, because they're experiencing hormonal changes, they experience hot flashes, which is basically that suddenly they will start feeling extremely warm. They might start sweating. They might wake up experiencing a hot flash, right? There might be changes in mood. But one of the things that you see is that this process, menopause, the phenomena, is extremely mediated by culture. What does that mean? That when you study the phenomena of menopause cross-culturally, one of the things that you see is that it is different. It's experienced differently by women all over the world. So in certain cultures where menopause brings with it a higher status for women, menopause can be experienced very differently. So in those cultures, there are no such, sort of hot flashes, or there are no sort of negative symptoms reported with the onset of menopause. Rather, it's considered a period where they're free, they experience themselves to be more free, more independent. So again, what sort of meaning is attached to the phenomena can also significantly alter the way it is experienced, right?